The workers' withdrawal, tactics, strategy, and disengagement from corporate control. Introduction, the lie we were sold. They told us that hard work leads to success, that discipline, loyalty, and resilience are virtues that will be rewarded, that if we show up, do our jobs, and put in our time, we'll climb the ladder. But look around. Wages are stagnant while CEO salaries multiply. Profits soar while layoffs increase. The cost of housing, education, and healthcare has risen beyond reach. The billionaire class is expanding, but the people who built their empires are barely holding on. This isn't a mistake. It isn't a crisis. It's functioning exactly as designed. Power belongs to those who control resources, not those who produce them. Ownership, not labor, determines wealth. No amount of extra effort will change this equation. No moral appeal will force corporations to act against their interests. No government will prioritize workers over capital without coercion. The old model, petitioning power, begging for fairness, is dead. The only leverage workers have is their ability to withdraw, the refusal to cooperate, the disruption of profit, the slow, deliberate erosion of a system that cannot function without them. This is not a manifesto about hope. It is about power, about winning, about the tactics that will force corporations, institutions, and political structures to bend, not out of conscience, but out of necessity. This is a game plan for the working class to reassert its control over the economy, not through empty rhetoric, not through blind resistance, but through strategic, targeted, unbreakable pressure. No more asking, no more permission, no more compliance. One, the manufactured reality of work. The first barrier to worker power isn't corporate policy, it's perception. Capitalism has spent centuries engineering a worldview where exploitation feels natural, where people believe that their suffering is their own fault. This is not an accident. It is a system of conditioning maintained by media, education, and corporate ideology. It keeps workers in a state of voluntary servitude, convinced that the only way forward is through more effort, more sacrifice, more waiting for change that never comes. Capitalism thrives on consent. The moment that consent is withdrawn, the system fractures. This is where power begins, in the refusal to cooperate with one's own exploitation. 2. The cultural maneuver, redefining work and effort. For decades, the right wing has owned the cultural framing of hard work, the grind-set mentality, the bootstrap narrative, the glorification of relentless effort. These ideas have been used to justify corporate exploitation. But effort itself is not the problem. The problem is where effort is directed and who benefits from it. To counter the dominant grind set, we must reposition work ethic not as a virtue in itself, but as a tool. Effort should be recognized as valuable only when it serves personal or collective goals, not when it is mindlessly given away to an employer who extracts profit from it. The real grind should be about ownership, autonomy, and self-determination. This is not about laziness. It is about reframing productivity as something that serves workers rather than corporations. The culture must shift so that excessive corporate loyalty is seen as naive, while disciplined work toward independence, building one's own projects, networks, and enterprises, is seen as the true expression of ambition. A strategy for cultural transformation must appeal to self-interest. Americans, shaped by individualistic values, do not rally behind abstract ideals alone. But what resonates deeply is the promise of personal gain. If disengagement from corporate loyalty is framed not as an ideological stance, but as a way to secure personal advantage, more workers will adopt it. If the idea of withholding labor is linked to self-respect, financial independence, and social status, it will spread far more effectively than calls for solidarity alone. The grind-set culture should not be outright rejected, but redirected. Instead of glorifying overwork for an employer, the focus should be on grinding for personal ownership, strategic networking, and calculated positioning. The message must be simple. The real winners are not those who burn themselves out for someone else's bottom line, but those who work just enough to take control of their own futures. To accelerate this shift, the movement must take hold in cultural spaces where attention spans are short and influence spreads rapidly. Social media platforms must become battlegrounds where memes, videos, and viral messaging push the narrative that corporate loyalty is a scam, and strategic disengagement is a status symbol. The new elite must be framed not as the hardest workers, but as those who extract the most from the system while giving the least in return. 3. The slow bleed, weaponizing inefficiency. Once disengagement spreads, the next escalation is strategic inefficiency. Capitalism functions on predictability, speed, and compliance. The moment those things disappear, profitability collapses. Unlike strikes, which require coordination and mass participation, slowdowns are decentralized and impossible to suppress. They function through quiet, relentless, individualized resistance. Workers can slow operations, increase corporate expenses, and create systemic dysfunction without openly declaring opposition. The logic is simple. Corporations only function when workers put in effort beyond what they are compensated for. A workforce that collectively stops trying, not out of organized rebellion, but out of cultural normalization, renders the system unworkable. However, this does not require mass solidarity in the traditional sense. Even individual disengagement, if normalized, can be co-opted by unions and labor organizers as leverage. By harnessing the trend of self-centered disengagement, activists can aggregate a scattered movement into a tangible force, directing its energy toward strategic demands without requiring ideological unity. 4. Corporate retaliation, why it won't work. Corporations will attempt to counter disengagement by introducing AI, automation, and increased surveillance. But these methods are limited. Mass automation is not viable in most industries without significant operational overhauls, and increased surveillance only adds bureaucracy that further slows productivity. Companies will also attempt mass layoffs, but this strategy only works if there is an excess labor pool ready to replace disengaged workers. In an era of declining birth rates, shrinking labor pools, and increasing worker cynicism, corporations will struggle to sustain their own operations without significant concessions. In fact, if corporations overcommit to automation without a corresponding expansion of the social safety net, they will accelerate their own downfall. A rapid displacement of workers without universal basic income or expanded public welfare will force a reckoning, either through mass economic instability or political upheaval. The very forces that seek to replace human labor will, by necessity, bring about the policies that protect it. The only way for corporations to function in a disengaged workforce is to offer better wages and conditions to entice workers back into engagement. This is the moment when negotiation occurs, whether through traditional union power, independent organizing, or economic leverage. Traditional unions remain a vital part of this equation, providing legal protections, collective bargaining experience, and a historical foundation for worker resistance. But union structures must evolve alongside modern labor tactics, integrating decentralized strategies of disengagement and economic pressure into their organizing models. 5. The Endgame, workers without masters. The final phase isn't just about better wages or conditions. It's about removing corporate dependence altogether. If capitalism is a rigged game, the solution is to walk away from the table. Worker-owned businesses, permanent strike funds, and legislative warfare are necessary to transition from disruption to control. Historical shifts such as the New Deal, the rise of trade unions in the early 20th century, and the labor movements that forced companies into compliance serve as precedents for structural change. When workers withdraw their compliance at scale, power shifts. This does not happen overnight, but through sustained pressure, economic incentives shift toward worker control. A disengaged workforce forces companies to either change their labor policies or collapse under their own inefficiencies. The ultimate goal is a system where work serves the worker, not the other way around. A society where labor is not coerced, but chosen. Where people are no longer owned by their jobs, but dictate their own economic destinies. They built this system on our labor. The moment we choose to walk away, it ceases to function.